Welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. I'm Michael Steele. It is always a special treat when you can spend a little time with me on the podcast. I'm excited because we're going to go across the pond today to have a conversation with my good friend, my buddy, Katty Kay, who is a presenter at large and U.S. special correspondent for BBC Studios. She's a frequent contributor to Meet the Press and Morning Joe. You see her there quite a bit. And the host of the new BBC show Influential with Katty Kay. She's a New York Times bestselling author and the co-author of The Power Code, More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women and Everyone. In addition to her work on women's issues, Katty has covered the Clinton administration sex scandal, 4 presidential elections, and wars in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. She was at the Pentagon just 20 minutes after a hijacked plane flew into the building on 9/11. So reporting from that site. So she is someone who is not only grounded in global news and politics, but certainly U.S. news and politics. And it is a special treat for us to have a conversation with Katty Kay. We're going to do that here on the Michael Steele podcast right after this. Hey everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. So I'm stoked because I'm going across the pond. Actually, probably.
Are we going to spend the whole episode speaking like that? Pretend British accents, Michael. I love that.
So, actually, I'm just in Northwest DC. But anyway, it is a real treat for me to welcome my friend Katty Kay. Guys, if you've watched Morning Joe programs on MSNBC and certainly the BBC, which I'm a huge fan of, BBC programming. It is a real treat to have Katty in the house. How you doing?
I am good. I'm also I feel like I should be somewhere more exotic, like, calling you from Chelsea or something. But I'm sorry, I'm not standing outside Buckingham Palace. No. I'm in Northwest Washington.
Well, it is a real treat. And you are a special correspondent for a lot of folks in DC who know you and worked with you. I was reading a great little piece and just sort of getting a little prep in my head about what I want to talk to you about, even though I know, because you and I, when we get together, we always have fun. But it was this great headline from 2023, November 2023. And I remember some of the things that you were involved with and some transitions you were making around the end of last year. And this headline was great. It was BBC bets on Katty Kay to woo U.S. news audiences. I love it. It was from Brian Steinberg in Variety, and I think that kind of speaks volumes about, before we get into the nitty gritty of politics between, here in Great Britain and elsewhere around the globe. I just think it's important for folks to know a little bit about the people who come on and have conversations, and the fact that you are well regarded in media, both at home and here. What's your secret sauce? What is it that you bring, you think, that is so attractive for a lot of American audiences?
I mean, partly it's that I've been here a long time. I came in 96 for 3 years and then just must have lost my passport or something and ended up staying. Just never managed to get away. This is the town that keeps giving the stories, right? I arrived like months before Lewinsky, and then we had 9/11, and then we had a war, and then we had a financial crash, and then we had Barack Obama, and I mean, it just, didn't
and
stop.
The next thing you know, your kids are going to college.
Next thing I know, my kids are going to college in America. What a dumb financial move that was. So I've been here a long time, but I think, it's also that, and so I think I've gained my credibility over the years, and I'm not one of those annoying Brits who comes in for a couple of months and tells Americans how they should run themselves. Right. And I have kids who have American passports. I have a vested interest in this country by virtue of having lived here for a long time. But I do have that background. I grew up in the Middle East. I worked in Japan. I've worked in Europe. I've lived in Africa. And I think just kind of viscerally having that sense of the rest of the world and how that there isn't just one way of doing things,
Right.
or also that things that happen in this city matter enormously to people around the world. The repercussions of what is decided on Capitol Hill or at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue ripple right around the world. And I think sometimes Americans aren't as conscious of that. So
Right.
having that sort of insider, but who has that inherently outside perspective, can kind of put America in a global context. Well, you know what? If you're thinking about healthcare, there are other ways of doing this. If you're looking at guns, there are other countries who have dealt with this in different ways. Immigration, huge issue. Climate change, huge issue. What are other countries doing? And I think occasionally Americans, because it's such a big country with such a huge economy and a massive military, there's sometimes a tendency to think there is only the American way of doing things. And maybe it's just having some of that. Or look, let's be honest, I speak the way I do, and it's weird and it's funny, and people just get used to it, or they think that it's like Chris Matthews. Literally, Chris Matthews once said to me, I was on his show. Do you remember when he did that Sunday show?
Uh-huh.
And I was doing that Sunday show with Chris. And after a bit, it was about the time of the Iraq War. God, that shows how long I've been here. And he said to me, Katty, I said, I hope people don't think I'm too pessimistic about how this is all going to end up. And he looked at me and said, Katty, people don't understand half of what you say, but they think you're really smart. And I thought, is that a compliment, or is that like not a compliment? Anyway, there you go. Maybe that's just it.
Americans melt at the sound of a British accent. I've seen it. I'm a huge Anglophile. I do it all the time. You think when you hear someone with a British accent, that is the smartest person in the room, bar none. I mean, I've literally been in rooms, Katty, where a British counterpart would speak, and you could see the entire room shift and look and listen, and they could be ordering coffee. I mean, it's not like, they're laying out something profound. It's like, no, I'd like to have some milk with my tea,
Yes, I'd like water.
I'd like water. Like, I think
there has to be a way to monetize this, right? I mean, I do have these insane, can I just say, your school fees, talking of differences, your kids could go to college in the UK for $20,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
They could go to college in Amsterdam for $0,000 a year.
Yeah.
So I think I need to monetize that way of saying water.
It was just to pay the fees.
Just to pay the freaking school fees.
So you touch on a lot of the data points that have been really important politically in the U.S. over the last 8 or 10 years, from the environment to guns to now, of course, abortion, which is roiling the Republican Party. Who didn't see that coming? And how do you, as a journalist, because I don't think people look at you, those of us who've worked with you professionally and know you personally, don't see you just as a British journalist, someone who is a correspondent for the BBC. They do really want to hear your insights on these issues, less from the standpoint of being, someone from another country who's covering stories here, but someone who's actually, like you just laid out your bona fides, particularly the tuition fees, someone who's also invested in this country. And therefore, when you speak on these issues, you have a certain level of gravitas in addressing some of these issues that other correspondents may not have. How does that? Do you recognize that when you talk on these issues, or are you're just being catty and saying, "Hey, this is the plain up and down of what's going on"?
I think I'm in an interesting position here, because the BBC has this kind of charter that we don't take sides, right? We observe. So we don't take a side, like we analyze, but we don't take sides. I actually don't have an American passport, so I don't vote. All my kids do. But it's very clear to see that a country that is committed to expanding rights for people, as it has been since the 1960s, for it to row back rights just seems kind of totally, it seems non-American in
Right.
the American tradition of the last 50 years. But it's also incredibly hard for all of those families and women who are dealing with this on a daily basis. I think Americans sometimes forget just the number of people who have abortions. 1 in 4 American women has had an abortion.
Right.
This is a lot. So look around the room, look around your office, look around your church, look around your community. And a lot of those women, as we are finding out since Roe, because the stories was overturned, the stories are coming out, the heartbreaking stories of people who really want kids, but something perhaps Americans didn't realize before Roe was overturned. It is the same procedure. If you need to terminate a pregnancy because that pregnancy is not viable, as if you want to terminate a pregnancy because you got pregnant and you cannot, for personal, monetary,
Emotional,
age,
whatever. Right.
emotional reasons, you can't have that kid. And I think, the way the country's been thrown into our people, I look at my daughters. I have 2 daughters who are Americans who are growing up in this country, and the idea that they would have less rights and less access to healthcare than I had
Right.
being here for the last 30 years is kind of shocking. It's
So
shocking. And it's at the same time as Mexico, by the way, is legalizing abortion.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, again, I've said for a while, and you can appreciate this reference probably more than most Americans who seemingly have no clue of our history. I've always viewed Americans largely still very much puritanical in their attitudes, and specifically with respect to women. We dress it up very well, and we find good flowery language, but as the saying goes, it's not what I'm saying, it's what I'm doing. And what we do, as evidenced by what we've seen in Arizona the past week, what we've seen in other parts of the country when it comes to respect for a woman's choice. And I say this as someone who is pro-life, right? That we don't really give a damn about those decisions. Men largely think they know better. And I was looking at a thing on the news the other day, and then followed it again on Twitter last night, where you had, this Wisconsin legislator who was basically laying out that, the next stage in this fight, of course, as you know, is contraception. So it was already making the case against rolling back protections for contraception, which, by the way, Katty, how the hell does the government get involved in the decision of intimacy between a man and a woman, and how they protect themselves or whatever? I mean, where's the government have a place there? But okay, this is the next space. And he was going on talking about how contraception makes a woman think basically that she's more than she is. I'm sitting there going, what the hell? So this attitude towards women is pervasive. It is now reflected in the misogynistic attitudes and behaviors of Hispanic men and Black men who are gravitating to Trump. That's the allure for them. That sort of macho, beat my breast, I'm the big badass on the block. Well, no, until your woman tell you to get your ass in the house, then it's a different conversation. But what is that? Why are we seemingly so out of step with the rest of the world when they are progressing? And yes, there are parts of the world we know where that's not necessarily the case, and we know what those regimes look like. Why are we leaning more into that type of put the veil on the lady and keep her fully clothed and all of that and take away her rights, versus, as you mentioned before, continuing to move in the direction of enhancing civil rights and protections, et cetera, et cetera.
Look, on that contraception bit, we shouldn't be surprised. Samuel Alito hinted at that, right?
Yes.
In the original Dobbs ruling, that there was going to be space to look at contraception as well. And everyone at the time, Republicans at the time, like, no, of course we won't do it. But look, hey, we're seeing this time and again. We're seeing, since Dobbs, you get conservative politicians around the country thinking, hey, I can take a little piece of this. I can push this a little bit further. I can go back to a kind of ruling in Arizona that is before women even had the vote. When I'm not being a journalist, I write these books on women and working. And I wrote a big book last year on women and power.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
I think in this country, like, we're looking at two big forces. We're looking at a demographic shift where America is becoming a minority white country. And that's producing a whole load of tension at various levels as whites start to feel threatened by the fact that they're not going to be the majority anymore. And we're also looking at a gender split where increasingly women are better educated. They have more degrees, more PhDs than men do. They're earning more than men are in many cases. And that's causing another whole set of tensions amongst men, particularly white men, who think, and I've literally had, academics say this to me, they've studied this, white men saying, but my dad had that and my grandfather had that.
Yeah.
And their wives stayed at home and their wives did what they wanted them to do. And they were the man of the house.
Yep.
And now, oh my God, my wife earns more money than I do. And how emasculating is that? And I think there is a kind of gender component, certainly, to Trump's populism. I mean, there's clearly a racial component, but there is a gender component that people don't talk about very much. You saw it with Bolsonaro. Right. You see it with Orban, right. The way they talk about women. You see it with Trump, the way he talks about women. And it plays into a broader thing amongst white, particularly not very educated men who are looking at the writing on the wall and thinking, oh my God, that life I had is being kind of taken away from me, partly by the fact that we've got a whole load of new immigrants in the country and they've got rights, and partly by the fact that these women are getting more access to power. And if you had to zoom out to 100,000 feet, I think it accounts for a lot of what we're seeing. I mean, that ruling in Arizona, that is like, can we please make our women put back on, chastity belts, stay in the home, never leave it, not have jobs, and not be independent? That's what it smacks of. I mean, it smacks of, can we give them back to the stage when they didn't have the vote?
Well, and that's exactly the point, because the Arizona law that everybody is now focused on, and much to the chagrin of a number of Republicans, including Trump, who thought they'd just be able to move on. This law was written at a time when Arizona was still a territory. The population of the state was about, or a little less than, 8,000 people. And this sort of, hardened, response to women. But they did, we made an exception that, if you can prove that she is, her life is threatened, then she can have the abortion, was, reflective of an era that women didn't have the right to vote. And this is the important thing I think people miss with this Arizona law, women were still considered property at that time. And so when you understand the context in which that law was written, I don't want, I want to secure my property, and so if there are circumstances in which she becomes pregnant, I want to be able to control that outcome because I own her. Right. And that to me is and the fact that a 21st century legislature would want to base its public policy on an 1864 law that regressively and aggressively goes after women, that's stunning to me. And the fact that, Republicans are now sitting here, acting like it's not a big deal as they're whistling past their own graveyard politically, I think on this issue is still another stunning feat. The arrogance of it, Katty, is what I find
Yeah.
so
And the kind of
amazing.
amazing ability to do a total about turn. Like I remember just before the midterms, I spent quite a lot of the summer down in Arizona, and I had the pleasure of spending the day with Carrie Lake. And I went with her to a retirement community, and I listened, and then I interviewed her. And I listened to Carrie Lake tell that community about how she was absolutely committed to making abortion, having a national ban on abortion, and she was going to make sure that there were no abortions in Arizona. She was all in on the pro-life vote and trying to get the pro-life vote from this conservative group that she was at, and how wonderful this law would be. And there was a law on the books in Arizona, and if only she was able to bring that back again. And now what's she saying? And now, oh my Lord, that Senate seat that I'm so hopeful of getting, I'm not going to get that Senate seat if I come out saying the kind of stuff that I was saying 2 years ago. I mean, she knows, they all know that this is politically toxic for them. This is why Donald Trump is twisting himself into a pretzel.
Oh my gosh,
to
yes.
try to explain his own position on abortion.
Yeah, it is absolutely one of those things you sit back and you go, excuse me, exactly, what did you say again? Because you're all over the map. Well, first off, Donald Trump has never taken a firm position on abortion. He has literally been all over the map. But those in New York who know him,
he's taken multiple firm positions.
Exactly.
I mean, he's actually taken, he's been all of them very firmly in that moment.
That's right. But most people who know him personally, privately, have said publicly, he's pro-choice. He's always been pro-choice. And I think that that's not something that should be lost on people. Yet the pro-life community, I think right now basically uses him as much as he uses them, because he achieves for them the goals that took them 50 years to reach, the overturn of Roe, and now the opening of this cultural Pandora's box on everything from IVF to condoms and other forms of contraception. And so that's the space they've created. How do you see, particularly when you talk about the women that you wrote in the Power Code, which is a great book, by the way, folks, that really gets into, the women leaders. When you look at those women leaders that you interviewed, how were their voices important in shaping this moment? Because my argument is, Katty, whether it's on issues like abortion, issues of education, on a number of other issues, but particularly this one, men are the one who are setting the nature and tone of the conversation. Women are kind of like following behind in it, and sort of, particularly on the Republican side, going, yeah, it's almost like Gladys Knight and the Pips in reverse. Where the Pips are the ones who are out front and Gladys is in the back going, yeah. What's your assessment of how women, particularly women leaders, are processing this, and what do you think you'll see from their level of engagement and involvement on this issue or other issues?
Right at the top, we're obviously going to see Kamala Harris, the vice president, out a lot more. She's going down to Arizona. I think finally and her relationship with the West Wing has been complicated. From the people I speak to inside the White House,
so generous. You're being so generous.
Right. It's, let's give her something where she can really succeed and make a go of herself and shine. I know we'll give her the border. Right. I mean, that was the kind of feeling that Ron Klain at the beginning seemed to think, what, is she going to outshine the president? Were they nervous? What was that kind of weird, you don't want her to get too far out ahead of everybody. So you give her something like the border. And then you realize, oh, Joe Biden's kind of old. And actually his approval ratings aren't that great. We need somebody who can help him campaign. Oh, I know, let's get the vice president out there. But the vice president's approval ratings are in the toilet. So we have to now try and get the vice president's approval rating. I mean, I've literally had this conversation with people in the White House who are saying, we kind of realized we needed her, but we had not done very much to give her the right kind of tools and to give her the profile and to give her the approval ratings we needed. So now that she has got this issue, which I think the West Wing finally recognizes she is really good at, and they've sent her out and they've sent her to abortion clinics, and she's going to go down to Arizona, and it's a winning issue for Democrats. So it gives
Right.
her the chance. She speaks compellingly about it. Helps that she actually is a woman. Joe Biden doesn't love speaking about this. He's the Catholic. It's a hard thing for him
Right.
to say that word abortion time and again. She's happy speaking about it, and she does it in a way that's very compelling. She does it on college campuses. And by the way, when she goes to college campuses, from everything I hear, there are lines of students waiting to hear her. They like her. She is a political asset. I just think it took the White House a while to realize what a
Figure it
political
out.
asset she is. So
Yeah.
she's going to be, I think she helps them. She helps the issue. She kind of feels natural talking about it in a way which is great. It's not those, Kamala Harris is where I feel she's less strong is when she's giving those big set piece speeches, and she finds reading prompter hard. So it doesn't work very well when she does that. But I think you're going to see real leadership from her, and it elevates the issue and it elevates her. You've got a kind of symbiosis there of a
Right.
woman leader taking on an issue that is a winning. Because look, what's this election going to come down to? It's going to come down to abortion, the economy, immigration, and Donald Trump's character. Right? I mean, I think it's two of those things work for Joe Biden and two of those things work for Donald Trump.
Right.
And
Right.
somewhere 100,000 people in this country across 5 states, probably on the morning of the election, will make up their mind based on which one of those they're hearing in the news.
Exactly.
But abortion is the big motivator for Democrats. We've seen it across all of, I don't think it's going to flip Florida, but I think it could keep Arizona in play more for them, and her going down there is going to help on this issue.
No, I think that's
definitely takes her leadership.
I think that's exactly right. And it really speaks volumes about the fact that they didn't really know what to do with Kamala. They, as a consequence, a more troublesome narrative forms up around her that, Republicans were very happy to exploit, to the point now where, you hear a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. Like, that's a bad thing.
Right.
And I think you're right that she has the ability and really the skill set to go out and galvanize the marketplace of voters around a set of ideas about not just the policy of the country, but of the administration, but the philosophy and the direction where they want to go. And it'll be interesting to see how much more room they allow her to do that. There's always sort of a dance between the popularity of the president and the vice president, but at the end of the day, president's the president. And if you're comfortable with that, then you let your vice president, as we've seen Obama do with Biden, and certainly Bush do with Cheney, you let them work the space that adds to your table, that adds to your ability to grow the effort on the administration, for the administration. I guess it's better late than never.
Yeah, because they need all the help they can get. This is going to be a squeaker. Look, I want to ask you something. I was down, I can't even remember. I was talking to a bunch of kind of small business owners not that long ago,
right?
For a story that I was doing, and I didn't prompt it, but one of them was talking about how, well, the thing is, if Joe Biden gets elected, the real agenda is that they want Kamala Harris. No, didn't even use her name. They want the vice president to be president, and she is a danger to the country. And I was kind of like, this was so intriguing, because what's she done? I mean, she's done almost nothing. How has this woman that's the nature of a vice presidency. And this guy was not informed enough to go back over Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor in California and say, well, it was that case that made her. No. He was just like, but the fervor with which this guy was convinced, or had convinced himself, or was reading enough stuff on TikTok or the internet, convince himself that Kamala Harris was like the devil incarnate and would ruin America. The only explanation I can come up with, she's not a white man. I mean, I can't, because there's nothing, I'm just looking over the record. What's in the record? What's this woman done?
Right. What makes her such a threat to the country? And when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, okay, so tell me exactly what the threat is. What's going to happen if she's there? You think your kids are going to do, what's going to happen to your children? What's going to happen to you? You lose your job? I mean, what? And they can't articulate it because it's all BS. It's all hyped up BS, and it all is rooted in race. And I will say this until the moment changes. This country refuses to address the issue. We've danced around it. We think we've solved it with civil rights marches and the passage of a civil rights law. We think, oh yes, we've climbed the mountaintop with the election of a Black man for president. We have not. We are nowhere near it, because you still see and hear and feel and know that those sentiments are there. They're not addressed. A new generation is now being taught the same bull that prior generations were consuming on issues related to race, how they view Black people. We still have narratives between the police and young Black men. We still have stories of women who are afraid when they see a Black man coming towards them, white women, that is. So there's still a lot of stuff that we have to deal with. Oh, and by the way, now that Black people are trying to tell their story in relation to the growth of this country starting in 1619, white folks upset about that. So, I just, when I hear stuff like that, Katty, it doesn't surprise me. And what does surprise me is just still how ignorant people are and how much they assume about race in this country, and what little they are actually prepared to do to address the issues. And so, yeah, Kamala suffers from that particular bias. I had someone say to me, white gentleman, a senior elderly guy in his mid to late 70s, we were talking, I know him a long time, and he just looked at me, he said, oh, we're not electing a Black person president again for a while. I was like, you know what? At least you're being honest. I appreciate that. I had nothing. I had no. All I could do is shake my head and go, "Yeah, you're right." And I looked at it and said, "Well, thank you for being honest, because I've known that for a while, since Obama left." But the rest of the country seemingly doesn't, and it manifests itself again. Going back to what we were saying about how we view women, the puritanical view we have about women. You have, for example, the average number of women who are heads of state, for example, or in government in their respective countries around the world. It's about 25%. And what does that say about the growth of power for women? And what does it continue to say about us that we're not in that league?
So the numbers are a little misleading, because when you add in women who are basically queens or who have become leaders, heads of state, ceremonial heads of state, just because of inherited position, that takes out quite a lot of them, unfortunately. It is actually something more like 12, 15% who are elected leaders around the world. I mean, look, I wrote about power because if I was looking around the world and I thought, wow, you know what? It's going so well. I mean, it's just going swimmingly out there. Like, we've got peace, great, climate, fantastic. I wouldn't have written a book about power. I mean, if I thought everything was going hunky-dory, why disrupt the model? But I don't know about you. I look around and I think, we could make some changes.
Yeah.
And it looks to me like having a few more women or people who have not had power. I think the key is it's about people who have not had access to power before having power. So it's about women, it's about people of color having power, people who have been excluded, get them into power. And I think we could change some things. The States is hard. I mean, God, ask Hillary Clinton, right?
Right.
The US is hard because a presidential system is much harder than a parliamentary system. In a lot of the places where they have an elected female head of state, most of them are parliamentary systems where you become head of your party. Let's take Nancy Pelosi. She would have been head of the party, and then the party gets elected. So you're not voting for a leader, for an individual. In the UK, when you go and vote in a general election, you're not voting for Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, the head of the Labour Party. You're voting for the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. And so it's sort of the leader of the party is slightly less of a high-profile figure that people have to rally behind because they're party voters. So I think that makes it easier. The money part of it makes it hard in the States too, because it's no coincidence to me that the first woman who got really close to the Oval Office was somebody whose husband had been president, and she had that Rolodex. So she had access to those big donors, and she had access to that whole infrastructure and network, which you can't really run for president in America unless you can have some kind of access to that. And I think that helped Hillary at least get, in her process of getting the nomination. And then I have to think that it's some of this, like you say, the Puritanism that is here in America. It's a strain of misogyny that is trying to hold women back, a fear of men losing something. There's this great theory called loss aversion theory, which is what we all feel when we lose something. Well, there's a bunch of men running around this country feeling they're about to lose something. And they're kind of right.
And
they are losing something. They're kind of right. They're not going to have what their father had and their grandfather had by God-given right, the fact that they've got a Y chromosome and they're white. It's not going to be like that. And I think that scares the daylight out of them. And so they try and hold women back. And I think it's a combination of all of those factors. So here, my husband has this theory. He says, here's what needs to happen. Joe Biden gets, for a woman to become president, Joe Biden gets elected. After a year, he says, actually, you know what? I am kind of tired and old, and it's time to put my feet up in Delaware. Vice president takes over. She has 3 years. She does an incredible job of it. And America has had, without having to go to the polls, its first female, not white president. And actually, it's all okay. I don't know if it will be all right, okay. But I can see that it was an interesting theory that you get people there kind of through the back door, which is kind of a shame, but actually maybe it just gets people over that weird hurdle they have about having to vote for a woman.
Yeah. That would be an interesting backdoor. Well, that again, I think some people kind of anticipate that backdoor approach, which is why they're already trying to preempt it as much as they can with some of the narratives out there. And so that's the frustrating part. We're going to take a quick break. We're having a wonderful conversation with my friend Katty Kay. When we come back, I've got a little bit more nitty gritty on the politics I want to get into you with, and some breaking news that's just come across the transom. We'll get into that when we come back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Michael Steele podcast. I'm here with my friend Katty Kay, U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC Studios. We've got some breaking news right here in our podcast. The word is coming through that OJ Simpson has died at the age of 76 from cancer. OJ, a polarizing, interesting, complicated figure for quite some time that sort of really put a huge shadow on his illustrious football and movie career with the murder of his wife and friend back, what was that, about the time you got here to the U.S.?
1994. It was 1994 that that he was charged with murdering his ex-wife, his former wife, Nicole Brown, and the world was completely gripped by the trial. I mean, I was living in Tokyo at the time.
Right.
And even in Japan, that news traveled, right? I mean, this was before the days of nonstop 24-hour television. But I remember that white car chase, the car chases.
The car chase, yeah.
And I don't even, with the white Bronco. I mean, scenes that are kind of stamped on my memory. And then, of course, we've all watched the recent TV drama series that kind of brought the whole thing back to life again. And this guy who had been incredibly popular, well known, and then this trial started, and it was complicated and messy. And Nicole Brown was white.
Yeah.
He was black. Race came into it. Abuse came into it. It was a really messy picture. And in the end, of course, he was acquitted, right?
Yeah.
Of the murder.
Yeah. And I
And
think
that
that
divided the country and
it
divided
divided
his
the country
supporters and
unlike
his
anything we've
detractors.
seen
And
at that time. Yeah.
Mhm.
It was absolutely amazing. And it really, in one sense, it's one of those pieces of the cornerstone for a lot of what we see today in politics and media, how stories are covered, the sort of clickbait nature of it. Even though you didn't have that infrastructure in place at that time, it did take other forms, just by the level of consumption, the fact that the trial was covered so heavily. It was, special broadcasting throughout the day and so forth, really sort of brought America into this new era of reality TV commentary and news that today drives virtually every aspect of what we see. And it all began with that white Bronco on the 405, and people going, "Oh my God, are you watching this?" And the helicopters and the noise and the imagery of the gloved hand, where he was in my view, pretending it was too small, he couldn't get it on his hand, and all of this stuff. It was so much drama related to it. But OJ Simpson has gone on to glory.
He has gone on to glory, died of cancer with his family, we understand, around him. Think back to that time, Michael, and you were even younger than you are now, and watching it then, did you take a position on it? Did you have a view on whether OJ was guilty or innocent? And was it something that people talked? Because I wasn't living in the country at the time. Were people talking about it a lot? What was
it? Was
were you in? Did the country feel like it was in camps like it is now?
Yes, it was a huge conversation. And it wasn't just, oh, how did white folks versus black folks feel about it? Even within the black community, there was a great deal of sort of roiling consternation around how people saw the events in the trial. A lot of people before the trial occurred, and certainly during the stages of the trial, believing that, well, he's a black man who allegedly killed a white woman. Well, he's done. It's all over, right? You just don't get away with killing a white woman in America if you're a black man. And then you had other people who had a view that he was set up or he was innocent, of what they claimed, because they thought there were elements of the system trying to scapegoat him. And there was some evidence during the trial of prosecutorial questions about prosecutorial behavior, or what the police did versus what they didn't do, what they did versus what they usually do, and so you had all these sort of elements that kind of played itself out, Katty. But at the end of the day, I followed the trial very closely. I looked at the facts. I looked at the storyline. I concluded he was guilty as hell. And he had help to either in the commission of the crime itself, but certainly in the cover-up of it. There were some things that for me were just irrefutable in terms of blood evidence and other physical evidence, both at the scene and of the crime and in the Bronco, et cetera. And I just thought he was guilty. And I thought that he got away with murder. I still believe that. And you've got to present the case. You've got to present the facts, and you've got to try it. And the prosecution did not. They could not make the
Mhm.
case as effectively and as well as they should have, because of the mistakes of the police and because of the mishandling of evidence, et cetera. And when you start a case like this, a high-profile case like this, on that footing, which is weak, it then weakens the rest of the case, in my view. But yeah, I think he got away with it. Still believe that to this day.
So, do you?
And
I have to. I just got a bumblebee on my shoulder. I don't know if you can see it.
oh, is that,
I'm just
yes,
gonna.
look at that.
I'm just gonna try and get the little bumblebee away from so it doesn't sting me, and put him over in that cup. Just stay there.
So
So,
smooth.
if that okay, so here's what you just said is so interesting that you went into it with one point of view, which was completely understandable based on the politics and the race politics of this country. Then you listened to the facts and you came out with another point of view. Fast forward to today. If we were going to have the OJ Simpson trial today, do you think people in this country are open to listening to fact in the
No,
way that you did in 1994,
no,
1995?
you
I'm
could not.
wondering.
A trial like this today would cripple the country. I mean, look. I mean, just look at what the hell's happening. Just trying to get Donald Trump to trial. And it just, you take a very popular figure, which OJ Simpson was at the time,
Mm-hmm.
very popular, I mean, Hall of Fame football player, well respected, this guy. And then just he had a good movie career. I enjoyed watching him in the movies he did. He was a good comedic actor. He was a good straight man for a lot of those movies, and people enjoyed watching him. And then to have something like this happen really roiled their sensibilities. It disrupted their view of, I mean, Americans are all about the neat and tidy. Despite what people think, we like things neat and tidy. We like straight line
Right.
storylines. We just hate the interruption of real life and humanity.
You want Hollywood. You want a Hollywood storyline,
We
right?
want a Hollywood because
good guys and bad guys.
That's it. We've been conditioned to have a Hollywood storyline. There is the white hat, the black hat. There is the up and the down. There is no gray. And so there, when you have this kind of disruption, and you've got a great lawyer like Mr. Cochran, you've got Kardashian, which is a whole nother storyline that peels off of the OJ Simpson trial. It just really disrupted how people looked at things and disrupted their sensibilities about things. And a lot of it, again, what would be akin to it? It would be the whole Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton thing. It was the first time we had a public disruption of our national view of the presidency and the president. Because remember, all the stuff about Kennedy was hidden. The press was complicit in hiding that his illicit affairs and his relationship with women and what was going on in the White House and outside the White House. All of that was, they wanted to perpetuate Camelot. Bill Clinton comes along and people are like, well, the hell with Camelot. Let's see what's going on in the bayou. What's going on in the backyard, right? And it becomes a very different conversation.
What happens? Bill Clinton comes out of all of that with higher approval ratings.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't hurt his approval rating.
And what happened?
So you have this huge disruption, and actually the country is like, you know what? We've got peace, we've got prosperity. The guy's done a good job. It's a blue dress. In the end, it's a blue dress.
It's a blue dress. That's exactly right. So you find that in moments like OJ Simpson's case, the country begins to reassess and assess again its attitudes. And what I find is, and you just made a very good example of it, it's not that the attitude hardens, the sort of oh my God, it kind of attitude hardens. They kind of like, oh, okay. That they put themselves in a situation, or they're very familiar with those situations, and they see it's not as scary as bad. And oh, these guys are humans too. I don't know. I don't know how that sort of ultimately plays out with the fairy tale notion of how we look at the presidency, how we look at things like that. But you can see how it all disrupts things. It disrupts our view of the world. And then Donald Trump comes along, 30 years later, and it's a whole different conversation. It's a very different way of looking at ourselves and looking at the men and women that we asked to lead us.
And no one's really doing what you did with that trial and looking at the facts. I mean, I think the big difference between OJ, Clinton, this time in America, is that positions have hardened so much.
Yeah.
All anyone really wants on the extremes of those positions is the fight.
Yep.
It's the tribe, and you're fighting for your. I mean, I just finished Tim Alberta's great book on the evangelical church. Have you read it?
Yeah, I'm starting it. Yes,
the Power and the
exactly.
Glory. It's so good. It's so good, and it's about the evangelical church, but it's also about the country. This notion that people they just want to fight now, and so when you just want to fight, the facts are irrelevant, and the fact that Donald Trump has a video saying he wants to grab women by the pussy is irrelevant because he's your fighter.
He's your fighter.
He's your guy. So it doesn't really matter. He was right. Donald was right. He could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and he's the guy you have in the ring. So you're all in behind him.
It's funny you raised that, because I'm gonna see if I can pull this up real quick. I got into this conversation with a reporter who was doing a story, and he was asking about some of these issues, and really what he boiled down to was, how does that moment with the Access Hollywood tape, how does that change? Did that change anything? And even now, how, given what Donald Trump in the hush money trial case, do you think if that information, if we knew more about that storyline between Trump and the two professional porn stars that he paid a total of $280,000 to, would that have changed things? And my response was, no, I don't think it would have changed things, because people generally, at that point looked at Donald Trump and said, yeah, well, sure. I mean, that's who he is. I mean, that's what's the big deal? It's almost like you just said about the blue dress. It's like, yeah, it's all of that. And it's just a blue dress, right? And so people's attitudes really kind of change up. And I think they feel more willing to sort of put out there attitudes and beliefs that our culture and our society had sort of contained. It was not polite to say that. If you had that story pop, in the 1980s or the 1970s, you're dead politically. But by 2016, everybody's like, yeah, we do that all the time. What are you talking about? Yeah, it's just, that's how men talk. Well, okay, if that's what you say, they may talk that way, but we never heard it out loud. Right. And so now that you hear it out loud, what do you think about it? How do you feel about it? And people basically said, I'm good with it. And what was interesting, Katty, a significant number of white suburban women were okay with it, because 52% of them voted for Donald Trump.
Clearly. And a significant number of evangelical Christians were okay with it. But here's something interesting. I saw this the other day, and I'm interested because I was reading Tim's book. So the evangelical Christians still, majority of them still support Trump, but the numbers have dropped since last summer.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, there's been about a 10-point erosion in his support amongst evangelical Christians. And I just wonder, as he starts to flog Bibles on television, and goes around the campaign that is really a sort of campaign of vengeance at the moment, whether you're not going to get a few more peeling away and saying, okay, well, we got Roe overturned. We got the Supreme Court, because that was the Faustian bargain that was made in 2016,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You put up with my stuff, I'll give you this. Well, they've got that now. And some of them, yeah, still clearly all in. And it's a tribal thing, and it's not about fact, and it's about we're in the fight and he's our fighter. So don't say anything wrong about him. But I wonder whether there's not going to be some who look at that scene of him selling a Bible and it doesn't sit well with some of them.
I think that there will
So
be
it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to watch whether he gets the same number as he did back in 2016.
I don't think he'll get the same number, but it will be enough of a number to hold court, hold serve, if you will, put it in tennis terms. While he's trying to, do what he needs to do to get that, as you referenced before, that a larger portion of those 100,000 votes over those 5 states that will make a difference for his election. But it does also kind of beg the broader question of for the Biden campaign, how do they go after those softening Trump voters? Because the softening Trump voter is not obviously a hardcore Trumper. Even as an evangelical, there is that line. So you have people who are all in all day, all the time. And then you have others who are like, well, I don't like his behavior, but I like his policies. And I hear a lot of that, and it drives me nuts because they can never articulate anything other than tax cuts. I'm like, but you didn't benefit from the tax cut. So what the hell are you talking about? What policy? I mean, what drug are you taking? And the sort of idealized looking back saying, oh, life was better because gas was $2 a gallon. Well, you know what? Life was better for me when gas was 50 cents a gallon. I remember that. So what's your point? What the hell are you talking about, dumbass? I mean, seriously, that's your go-to? That gas was $2 and is now $3? Well, bitch, I'm pissed off that I'm paid I remember when it went up to $1, I damn near lost my mind from 50 cents. So get a grip already.
I mean, that's it. It's food prices. It's inflation. It's what I hear the whole time. It's how much the cost of living is. And I think that that's going to be the challenge, right, for the Biden team. And of course, you could say to people, well, Donald Trump didn't have inflation because he was not there when there was COVID and supply chain shocks. And stuff wasn't getting here from China, and the Saudis were not reducing their oil production. I mean, this is what Team Trump says. Well, we're going to get into. They've told me this. We're going to get into office, and on day one, the Saudis are going to up oil production. That's going to bring down energy prices, and that will bring down inflation. And who knows? Maybe Jared's done some kind of deal with Mohammed bin Salman, and that's actually what's going to happen. But the thing of food prices and inflation is what people are talking about, right? Everywhere you go, people are talking about that. And so when you ask what can the Biden team do to win over those soft voters, it's to some extent it's in the hands of the Fed. Can they bring down inflation rates? Well, interest rates, people would like that because it would make housing cheaper. But I think it's reminding people of everything they've done kind of is starting to piss people off because they're still paying too much for sugar. But I guess you have to go on offense. Well, what's Donald Trump's, going to do for you? What are his actual policies? I mean, it's a combination of everything. They've got to do it all right, Michael. They've got to remind people of what they've done. They've got to go on offense and talk about what Donald Trump would do for the country. They've got to play to their strengths and a bit of empathy for people, perhaps. Yeah, that's one thing I am hearing from focus groups. People feel a bit gaslighted. Like they're just saying the White House is just saying it's good, that the economy is good, and that they've done a load of things. So maybe there needs to be a little bit more of that Joe Biden empathizer in chief. I know it's expensive. I know. I don't know. Thank God I'm not running this. I'm never running political campaigns. You're the strategist. How would you do this?
Well, I would do a lot more leaning into that narrative. I wouldn't talk so much about and Ron McClain yeah, got in trouble with
Ron Klain.
Ron Clay. Yeah, I'm McClain. I'm thinking of Kiki McClain, who was a good friend. Ron Clay got into trouble because on a hot mic, you know, he actually was speaking a little bit of truth about where the Biden administration is, in that they need to talk a little less about, oh yeah, we did infrastructure. It's not so much what you did, it's how addressing how people feel about what they didn't know you did. Because that's really what it is. They, by and large, aren't aware of all of that. So it's making people understand that you understand and empathize with why they're upset that they're paying X amount for sugar and eggs and milk, and that gas is $3.29 on average around the country when it was $7, but we won't go there. So it's, inflation is now 3.5 when it was 9, but we won't go there. But that's the difficult part for him, is explaining those narratives. And I think the political team around the president needs to get sharper at that. I think they're not as sharp as they could be.
Yeah.
And they
hear that
are
frustration with the messaging.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
And they're overly protective of a man who knows how to do politics. Yes, he's older. He's 4 years older than he was. I don't know why anyone thought that he would youthern from the age of 77 to 73. No, he aged to 81 over 4 years. So let's get past that. Just let him go out and be himself, have those flubs, because we know he does that. That's his history. And they are somewhat endearing, yes, embarrassing and all of that. But again, he's not the guy who wants to be a dictator. And that's the narrative I think they need to put out there. But we'll see if they will. Before I let you go, I got to talk 2 things with you. One is foreign policy, and the other is the royal family. So you know how that goes. So let's do a little foreign policy. Your hot take right now on the U.S.-Israeli narrative vis-a-vis Gaza, Hamas, and the impact it potentially could have on this upcoming election cycle, from what you're seeing and hearing and writing about.
Look, I think the impact on the election cycle all points to Michigan, right? Mm-hmm. And also young voters. I had an interesting conversation the other day with a guy out in Hollywood who's a sort of bundler of celebrities. And he is asking them to put money into the Biden campaign. And they are saying they don't want to because of Gaza, which I thought was kind of interesting. And they are young, or they're not young college campus voters. They're not Arab Americans up in Michigan. They are, celebrities in Hollywood who are saying, right, we don't like what's going on. So they'll come around. They'll donate to the Biden campaign. But certainly it's already, you can feel the real-time impact. And there's the potential, I think, certainly in a state like Michigan, where it could have a longer impact, because those people have lost family members. I mean, they haven't lost 5 family members. They've lost 30 or 40 family members, according to Debbie Dingell. So they're not going to forget. Grief is like concentric circles. When you've lost somebody close to you, you don't forget. Yeah. And they've lost a lot of people close to them. I think on the kind of the bigger picture, I had a very interesting conversation with one of our correspondents, BBC editor out in the Middle East, and he said American diplomats have told him that the United States looks weak. Yeah. And this is from American diplomats in the region, because it's okay to say you're frustrated with baby Netanyahu, but you're supplying him with a heck of a lot of weapons, including 2,000-pound bombs. What are you getting in return? What's America getting in return? What's Joe Biden getting in return for this? Yeah, he got one more checkpoint. Yes, the supply of food aid has stepped up a little bit, but not enough. I mean, you have kids who are going very, very hungry. You have families who are grinding up dog food to make flour, to make bread for their children. So I think, that doesn't look great. And I just think on the strategy of this cannot be good for Israel. I mean, I hate to quote Don Rumsfeld, but they are creating a lot more terrorists and people who hate the country. All of those people who have lost a brother, a father, a husband, a sister, a mother, a best friend, somebody they love. You think they're going to turn around and say, oh, yeah, we'll live cozily in a two-state solution and that's fine? I don't think so. We didn't see that in Lebanon after Sabra and Shatila, and there was a generation of people
There
whose
absolutely
life's
was.
mission was to destroy the state of Israel. So I don't know. I don't see good scenarios out of this, and I think America needs to have it would be good if America had a little bit more backbone, or was seen to have a little bit more backbone in
What would
this
that backbone look
situation.
like, Katty?
I
From
guess,
what
I mean,
from
at
what you're
this
hearing
point, I mean, the
from
thing
Europe?
I'm hearing is, why aren't they conditioning aid? Why is
Ah,
Israel getting a free pass
right.
when other countries don't, given what Israel is doing?
Do you
Why
think
is
that
it
has to
taking
do with
so long to cross that Rubicon?
yeah? Do you think that has to do with the Jewish community here at home and the fear of backlash?
It's
Because
a
I
very,
my
very
appreciation
long-standing
is that,
relationship,
yeah,
right?
there's
I mean, I think
aren't they
it's
split?
decades of I think younger Jewish voters have been split for a long time, certainly on Netanyahu. But I don't know if it's even I think it's almost psychological for politicians of Joe Biden's era, which is clearly not the case for younger Americans, but politicians and voters of Joe Biden's era, it was like it's the third rail of American politics. You stick
Right,
by Israel, right?
right.
That Israel is your friend in the Middle East. And there is this sense of, you and I had this. Our parents went through the Second World War. We feel much closer to the Holocaust and to what happened to Jews and to the need for a safe state than even my kids do.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
kids are of that generation that were like, well, yeah, we know what they went through, but look what they're doing,
And
right?
that's it. That's it.
And that was starting to change even last year.
Yeah,
Before October the 7th, the
yeah,
opinion polls were showing that a majority of young Americans supported Palestinians more than Israelis. And
yeah.
that's got to be scary for Israel. If
And
I were
what
sitting
is
in Israel, I would be looking at this and thinking, this
we
is the
have a
shift that's
problem.
coming. When
Yeah,
these people get into power,
yeah.
they don't feel that same commitment. By the way, my bumblebee is alive and well and flying around, just so everybody knows.
Well, that's good. That's it. You didn't squish it in the
No,
napkin.
of course I didn't squish it in a
But
napkin. But
that would
I
have
was
been
hoping,
me. But
I was hoping he would stay in the napkin at least until we finish recording.
well, we're gonna wrap up so you can go deal with the bumblebee because we last said bumblebees are cool. BBs are,
Yeah.
they're a little bit different. Yellow jacks are a whole different ball game. But all right, so I I know I kept you a lot longer than I promised, but I just love talking
We'll
with
do it
you.
again.
You're just such a font of information. So just real quick before you go,
Okay.
what the hell's going on with the royal family?
What the
Why are
hell?
they poor Kate? I mean,
Poor
seriously,
Kate. I mean,
I
poor Kate, I'm
cannot
sorry.
believe.
She was basically kind of bullied.
Yes.
And they could have saved her a little bit from that. They could have come out a little bit sooner and saved her from that. But all those people who were kind of online bullying Kate, I hope they're having a little think now about,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
leave people
It was
alone.
just disgusting in my view.
It
And
was.
I just,
And
the
it's
whole,
hard.
it's just odd and weird. And it's kind of reflective of the time we're in where we just lose sight of each other's humanity. And we
Yeah.
think the worst, we
It's these
project the
things.
worst.
It's
Yeah.
these things
Yep. Right here. Katty Kay,
right
she
here.
is the best.
Okay.
She is the best. I really appreciate you. I love our conversations. I'd like to do more of them. I'm looking forward. You've got a new thing called Influential with Katty Kay. How's that going?
So fun. Oh my God, I'm loving it. This is my new BBC show. I get to have a little bit of ice cream with my new spinach and interview people like Ina Garten and Hugh Bonneville and Wendell Pierce, who is just delightful, and Misty Copeland. I had a great time. So I'm
Can
going around
we
interviewing these
see that
people
on
who
the
are kind of,
BBC channel?
yeah, you can see it on YouTube. Influential on, it's on the BBC, but it's also on YouTube. You can find all of the
Wonderful.
clips there. It's great.
Well, I will be
It's
checking
fun.
out. I encourage everyone else to check it out. Also, check out her book, The Power Code, about women leaders, powerful women. A great read for sure, and certainly the work that she does for the BBC as a special correspondent. Katty Kay, she is the best. As I said, as I started the conversation at the top of our conversation. BBC bets on Katty Kay to woo U.S. news audience. Well, she wooed the hell out of me long time ago. I consider her a friend and one of the best. Katty, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, my friend.
All righty. That
We'll
does
do
it
it
for.
again.
Oh, we will. We will. And I won't get into the ice cream and spinach part of what you said, because that was just disturbing, ice cream and spinach, but maybe it's a British thing. I don't know. Anyway, Katty Kay, she's the best. Until next time, folks, be well. Take care of yourselves out there. Be sure to check out Katty's program, Influential with Katty Kay, on YouTube. Also, check out her books, The Power Code, More Joy, Less Ego. It is out as well. Until next time, y'all, take care of yourselves. Be good.